Anyway, very good to see you here. And this is a talk, a series of talks that is being done for St Mary's, the church up on the hill, and which is currently a ruin. And the Lower Wye Valley Buildings Preservation Trust is trying to save it. That's called the LWVBPT, and I challenge you to say that after another glass of wine. But anyway, they have a Facebook if you're interested in saving this wonderful church, which is literally up the hill, and it really is falling down. And so every penny you're donating for tickets and drinks tonight is going towards that fund. And even more to the point, it's showing community engagement, which is essential for getting grants out of bigger organisations. So it's absolutely terrific that everyone's here and has forked out for a ticket. So the only other thing is, if there's anybody who wants to get involved with this, saving the church, anybody who's got any ideas for skills, skills and wants to do fundraisers, quizzes, promise auctions, sponsored walks, all is welcome. And do please just get in touch with somebody from the committee, because we're just trying to get a bit of momentum here before the thing falls down. And if it does fall down, there will be, that's goodbye to centuries of history, because that church was where the lay folk of the Abbey used to worship, 5 centuries ago. So it's definitely worth saving. Great. So that's the bit about the campaign, and now we are all set to talk to David, who, as you know, is our legendary local photographer, lives in the village, has lived in the village for 50 years, takes wonderful photographs, as you know, and we're going to sit and chat and just go through your life, David, from the very beginning, when you weren't really a photographer. In your teenage years, you were an athlete, weren't you?
I'm extremely dyslexic. And it's very useful at school if you don't want to get bullied to do something. And it happened that I was pretty good at athletics, well, anything sporty.
Yeah.
I have good eye-hand coordination, and that got me through most of school. Yeah.
And you played rugby for England under 16. You were being quite.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
We were talking about you being at school and being an athlete.
Yeah.
And then, as a result of that, you went into the army.
The thing about dyslexia, if you have it, is that everything. At the time when I was at school, there was no such word. It wasn't actually in the dictionary, and it only become so. You were thick. By and large, you were considered thick. The interesting thing about dyslexia is that it has some very positive sides. One of the positive sides is that apparently one has a very advanced sense of pattern. Now, in photography, when you're taking pictures, basically the picture has 2 parts. It has the visual part, which is the geometry of the picture, and it has the content, which is when you press the button. So if you have an exaggerated sense of pattern, you've got half the battle done. So photographically, being it helps a certain amount. Now, of course, I didn't know this when I was at school. When I was at school, I actually wanted to be a vet. So if I was starting now, there is no doubt that I would be a vet. Because, it's easy to get into university now, whereas at the time when I was at school, you had to have Latin as your main subject at the veterinary university. And I suspect that very few young people now have Latin as their main subject. But my father was in the army and was away, and so I went to boarding school most of the time. And I had a good time at boarding school. I did a lot of sports. I did rugby and I did athletics and I did cricket, etc., which got me through. but it meant that when I finished at school, I had no qualifications whatsoever. And so the only qualifications I have are things that people have given me since. But one of the things...
The first photos.
Sorry?
The first photos.
Yeah. So looking back in hindsight, and I emphasize in hindsight because I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I used to collect postcards when I was in boarding school, and on my wall, these are just some of the postcards I have, and I still have the postcard. What to me, in hindsight, is interesting about them is how pattern-orientated they are. So if you look at the pictures of Bruegel, or you look at the pictures of Seurat, or of Renoir, or of Degas, they're very much with an emphasis of very strong sense of design. And in hindsight, I think, is that interesting? Was that me sort of saying to, well, this is something you could do? I have no idea. But what I do know is I've still got the postcards, and these were things I enjoyed enormously at that time.
So after school, you then went on into the army.
Yes.
And you're still not a photographer at that point.
No.
You're an athlete in the army. And then tell us about how you got into photography. Why? What was the moment?
Well, I mean, I enjoyed being in the army. I went in as a private, but because I was very good at sports, the army loved sports, you know. So the next thing I knew, I found myself at a place called Eton Hall, which is because I went into the army because you had to do national service at that time. And so I decided to do it early and go straight from school to do 18 months in the army. I found myself at Eton Hall, which is the officers' training place for national service, and very quickly was invited to go to Sandhurst, which is kind of like the University of the Army. You know, it's sort of, it's actually an enjoyable place. It has a very, very high standard of lecturer to do with army things, and I enjoyed it. And so my life was mapped out for me. I was suddenly going to be an army officer for the rest of my life, etc. And I'd been in the army for about a year and a bit, thinking that's what I was going to do. And I was in the officers' mess there, and I was looking at some magazines, a magazine called Picture Post, which some of you might know of, but it was a wonderful documentary magazine which was primarily at its best during the Second World War. And I picked it up and I started to cry, and quite obviously crying, you know, not a little bit, but really crying. And the reason that I cried was because when I picked up this magazine, I saw a picture of a Russian army officer. It was on a story to do with Moscow. Russian army officer buying his wife a hat in a department store in Moscow. Now, my dad had been away during the whole of the war. I hadn't seen him at all. He was in something called Potsky's Private Army, which was some nutters, you know, in the Second World War. And when he came back at the end of the war, of course, to all intents and purposes, I'd never seen him. And the first thing he did when he came back was to take me, or rather took my mum with me in tow, and he went to Howells in Cardiff, which is where our home was, and he bought her a hat. And so the first symbol of the love between my mother and my father was the seeing of him buying her a hat in Howells. And suddenly I saw this photograph in Picture Post of a Russian army officer doing the same. And I'd had all the propaganda at St Andras, you know, all Russians eat their children and they're bad people, etc. And I suddenly looked at this and thought, hang on, this isn't true. And I realized, the more I thought about it, that photography had the ability, if recorded accurately, to really, really create strong emotions. But it also had the ability to attack propaganda. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, that combination is pretty interesting. You know, the idea that you can produce some sort of enhanced emotion and at the same time make a comment about the world, i.e. propaganda, I thought, I'd love a bit of that. Now, it was very surprising, and in hindsight, I have no idea why so stupidly I decided to do it, but I decided I wanted to be a photographer. I thought, I want a bit of that, I'd like that would be fun. So I left the army, which luckily I could do, because as national service, you only had to be in for a year and a half. And I went up to London, and I sold shirts in Harrods to earn a living or to buy a camera, etc. And I started, I can show some pictures. These were the first pictures that I took when I learned to shoot pictures by going every night to coffee bars, which were quite difficult situations, and photographing in coffee bars. And the first lesson that I learned there was that there are two groups of people. There are what I call doers and talkers. And they tend to group together. So the doers tend to do, and the talkers talk. And I'm sure they each get fun out of it, but I enjoyed the doers. And so every time I shot pictures, and this was my first camera. I can't even always remember how to open it up. Anyway, it's a bellows camera, and this was the camera that I could afford to buy at that time. The picture in the top left up there is taken with this camera. And that was probably one of the first pictures I ever took. So I used to take pictures, and then I used to make little prints of them and take them to the coffee bars. And as I say, when you showed the pictures, the doers tended to come and look and see what you were doing. And those doers, some of them was Ken Russell was there. Ken Russell was a ballet dancer at that time, surprisingly, and Julie Christie was there. She was at school, and a whole mass of these sort of people were there, and I became friends. And one of them was Michael Foot. Michael Foot, the politician who later nearly became Prime Minister, was at that time a writer for Tribune magazine. And so I slowly started to meet these people who were positive. The beautiful thing about meeting doers is that you learn from them. One of the things I learned in life is always try to be with people that are better than you are, because you learn from people that are better than you. People that are not take from you in a way. So it was the sort of first little lesson that I felt. And so I started to shoot pictures in the coffee bars and on the streets. And
Michael Foot suggested you went to Hungary.
Yeah,
didn't he? Yeah.
And Michael at that time said, look, there's something happening in Hungary, so why don't you go and do it? So I was just 22 then, and so I said, okay. And so I went, and anyway, I came to the conclusion that this little camera with the bellows perhaps was not the best thing to use if you're photographing in an uprising. So I actually bought this second-hand Contax camera. And so this is the camera that I took to Hungary with me. But I didn't have much money, so I could only afford 20 rolls of film. So I hitchhiked to Hungary with my 20 rolls of film and this.
And you didn't have that much experience at that point.
I had no experience.
So you just picture, this is the Hungarian uprising.
Yeah.
The oldest people can remember, I'm sure, 1956. Yeah. But I mean, amazing that Michael Foot says, off you go. And
off you go. And
you're in the hotel just taking pictures. And we've got some of those, haven't we?
I have.
We've got one anyway.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So what actually happened was that I got actually to Austria, and I have no idea how, but I met up with the Red Cross, and I got a lift in an ambulance to Budapest. And when I got into Budapest, I sensibly went to the British Council. There was no embassy in Budapest at that time. Went to the British Council to say that, look, I'm a Brit. And they suggested that I went to a certain hotel where all the press were. Now, in situations of great tension like this, the press tend to always stay together in the same place because they give information to each other. People think that everything is happening all over the place. It isn't. Most of the time, you can be sitting drinking coffee in one street and they're hitting hell out of each other in the next street and you don't even know it. So to get information of what's going on is very useful. Anyway, so I went to this hotel and of course I was new. I was still learning to shoot pictures. And these couple of people came up to me and said, oh, who are you? And I said, oh, I'm a photographer, etc. And they said, well, we're from Life magazine. Our photographer hasn't got in. You work for us. So I thought, well, little did they know that up in my room I was still having the book on how to put the film in the back of the camera, which is, it's a difficult camera to put film in. But anyway, so you can't miss out. If you're with the best journalists in the world, if you're sensible, all you do is trot along behind them and go wherever they want to go. You know, then you shoot some pictures. They go to places where there's interesting things happening, and if you see something, horrendous, like a guy, being held up by rope by his feet to a tree or something, and people peeing all over him or something, obviously you shoot a picture. It's not rocket science.
Was it true to say that, I think at that point, you're in with some of the great photographers of the time. Don McCullen was there, and other people who made their very famous news photographers, but you always had this bent, I think it's fair to say, to do the quirky stuff on the edge. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I've always been interested by what Updike calls the exotic of the mundane. In other words, it's finding out in ordinary life what makes ordinary life work, and I enjoy doing that, and I've kind of more or less always done that. And what actually happened is that when you're in these sort of tricky situations, one of the most difficult things is getting out. And of course, the Life magazine people that knew how to get you out, So I came back to England, and I just had a couple of pictures published in Life, and they distributed to the Observer, etc. And one of the things I learned, it's better to start at the top than the bottom. If you start at the top, if you're intelligent enough to try to understand what big magazines need or want, you can cling on. And so that's what I started to do. I put this picture up here because it was a picture, it was the first picture that I ever took that really upset me. This was the first time I saw a 12-year-old kid with a loaded rifle.
And there's a statue now, isn't there?
And there's a statue of him from this photograph, which is quite nice.
And
but
is that in Hungary now?
And that's in Budapest.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's just jump on to, after that, you're in London, swinging 60s beginning, I guess.
Yeah.
And you're in with all these people, you know, the Beatles, and should we move on to more pictures? Oh yes, who's that?
Okay, so
Anybody recognise her?
yeah. So I started to shoot pictures, and I was being successful, etc., etc. And then a friend who was a publicist asked me if I wanted to work on the movie El Cid, just to do some things, and it was very lucky because this is Sophia Loren, and she's married to a guy called Ponte, Carlo Ponte. Carlo Ponte is the exact opposite of her. She's a large lady, you know, very well endowed, large lady. And Ponte is a very little sort of guy, you know. He sort of disappears if she hugs him. But they were absolutely wonderfully in love. And what was nice was that Ponte spent most of his time in Italy, and we were in Spain, and because I wasn't a movie star, etc., I could be with her without the press writing silly stories about things. So I spent an enormous amount of time with her. I actually had the next apartment to her, and we became very, very friendly. And
that makes, doesn't it, for the very best photographs, because this is a very intimate photo.
Yeah.
And you know, the average film star is not going to give random blow
not
that. So you're in on the, and this is something you do. You just kind of sneak in.
Yeah.
and get the pictures. I mean, it's unbelievable. This is a lovely story. And then you know you're sort of mingling with all these interesting people like the Beatles, I think, is the next one, isn't it?
No.
Oh my goodness! This is yeah.
The publicist on the film was a guy called Tom Carlyle, and he was an ex-Life magazine writer and wonderful writer and wonderful publicist, and he introduced me to Dick Lester. It all gets very complicated, but my dearest friend was a writer who was writing at that time for Frankie Howard and was in something called Associated London Scripts, which was Spike Milligan, Peter Sellers, Ray Galton, Alan Simpson, Johnny Spate, all these writers, etc. Peter did a little television film called the Running, Jumping and Standing Still film, and I shot some PR pictures for those. That was directed by Dick Lester. The Beatles saw the film, decided that Dick Lester should make their film, and so Dick Lester said to me, do you want to come and shoot the pictures of this pop group or something? And I said, well, I'd be delighted to do it as long as I don't really have to photograph them. I'm much more interested in the relationship between them and their fans, etc. I mean, obviously I would photograph them, but what I was saying is that I'm not going to set up pictures or pose pictures, etc., which is a boring thing to do because 400 photographers all shoot the same bloody picture, and 50 years later, nobody wants them. All they want is my pictures because I had all the pictures where we were playing Monopoly and things like this together, etc. So
we can jump onto that one.
Oh, okay. That's talking about the Beatles. Sorry. One of the things was that Tom phoned me up and said, look, I'm doing this rather B movie with this actor who's never been in a film before, Sean Connery, and a girl called St Andras that's never been in a film before. So anyway, I went to shoot on this film, and we didn't even have a poster for it. And suddenly the film was a great success. And because it was a great success, they rushed out another film, and then they said, we need to have a poster.
This was from Russia with Love, was it?
This was Dr. No.
Dr. No was the first one.
Yeah.
And then,
And what actually happened was that we had to shoot the poster in a studio in London of an evening because they were shooting on the film all the time to get it out quickly. When it came to shoot, I mean, we're talking about a small studio with Sean, about 11 women, girls, whatever you like to call them, Cubby Broccoli, producer, etc., all in the studio. And Tom comes up to me and says, David, he said, I don't know what we're going to do. I've forgotten the gun. So we didn't have a gun. We had all these people in the gun. The film was being shot at Ffoton, which is about an hour and a half drive out of London. So it would have meant a 3-hour drive to get the gun. Now it happened that my hobby that I like to do was to shoot really to Olympic standard, shoot with an air pistol. And the air pistol I had was Walther, and the Walther is the make of the gun that James Bond in theory has, etc. And the gun I had was in a case which had Walther written over it. I said, look, nobody here will know. I said, we'll shoot this with the air pistol, with him. Nobody will know. They'll do it, and then the designers afterwards can cut the barrel off, etc. So we shot all the pictures, and this is dear Connery, one of the pictures that was, and anyway, the designers forgot to cut the barrel off. So if you look at the first 3 posters of the James Bond film, they're all with Sean Connery with an air pistol. So that was the story behind that.
If you hop on, you'll get to the Beatles, I think. Yeah, that's it.
And then we got on to the Beatles. And these were the sort of pictures that I was kind of taking of the Beatles, which was, as I say, much more to do with them and their fans, etc., than it was to do with.
So being with these kind of iconic film stars and bands and stuff, then other people kind of want you, don't they? And so you find yourself getting into this sort of thing, magazines.
Well, what actually happened was that Harper's Bazaar wanted to do a fashion layout on Sophia Loren. And Sophia said she would do it as long as I shot the pictures. Now, I've never shot a fashion picture before in my life, you know. So I thought, well, just do what you normally do, you know. So I sort of shot some pictures of Sophia, and then Harper's asked me to work for them. And so I work quite a... People think if you work as a fashion photographer, you do an awful lot. But, I mean, Harper's Bazaar comes out just 12 times a year and probably has 10 stories in each. So they only do 120 days shooting. And, you know, I did, I think, 5 covers or something. But I used to enjoy it, you know. But I didn't enjoy the pictures. I just used to give the film to the fashion editorist. I wasn't the least bit interested in even seeing the pictures, but it was fun to do.
But why? So David, why was that you didn't want to?
Well, it just that sort of photography. I mean, the problem is that people love all this stuff and they think it's important, and you find yourself typed by that. As I say, I shot in my 60 years of photography probably 25 days of fashion. That's the total thing that I shot. So you shoot very little on these things. I shot on 20 or 30 films, but never more than 2 days. So that's another 60 days out of my 60 years of shooting pictures. So it's not a major thing, but it's the thing that people tend to be attracted by and etc. This was, and also I was working not only for Harper's Bazaar, but for the Telegraph. But as I say, I didn't really know what I was doing, so I just used to, say to the models, "Oh, just get on with it, do something, pretend you're whatever, pretend you're having an affair with a polar bear, and then I'd just shoot pictures as though I was shooting pictures of somebody at the village fete, and it worked because it was a kind of new sort of fashion at that time. There was a big exhibition at the V&A to do with fashion, and that was one of the things they said. This was a breakthrough in fashion because it stopped from those very posed. I didn't know how to pose anybody. I still don't. I mean, if I shoot portraits now, I can't tell anybody what to do. I just have to chat and hope that they do something, and it kind of works.
This fashion photography, is that quite well paid as in comparison to?
Well, the fashion isn't very well paid, but if you work for somebody like Harper's, all the big companies like Morley's and like Austin Reed's and like, they all want you because you're working for Harper's Bazaar. So you suddenly make ludicrous amounts of money photographing people's stockings in this. This is more than a stocking. I mean, the whole thing, you need a sense of humour. And if you've got a sense of humour, it's very funny.
But you weren't seduced into just, I mean, you could have just been, somebody that did advertising photography and became immensely...
No, I gave it up as soon as I could,
And let's look at a few of the people that you shot, which I think is the next one, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously this then leads out to other things, and so for magazines like Vogue and things, I did masses of sort of portraits of quite famous people, and you become very friendly with them sometimes. I mean, Peter O'Toole, whenever I was away from my flat, somehow used to have a spare key and use the flat for whatever purposes he wanted to use it for. And so I just became very friendly with all these people. I always liked them very much. Most of the ones that I was photographing were extremely talented, and so you can see Michael Caine, Ursula Andress, Susanna York, Audrey Hepburn, Leslie Caron, Ingrid Bergman, and oh God, I've forgotten her name now.
Jean Shrimpton.
No. Anyway, she was in the film Lady Caroline Lamb or something.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah.
So, but these are the photos you like to photograph, or
these were portraits I liked because they were very casual. They were never posed.
Yeah.
They were always because I was in some way involved, with something going on, and that was fun to do.
Yeah.
You'd spend a day.
So it's the same thing of intimacy, isn't it? That you get in and you know people, and they relax, and then you get these photographs.
And then you do that.
Yeah. Let's look at the next one, which is...
okay. And I put, this is Tom Carlyle, who was the great friend and publicist, and that is some of the... When we did the James Bond, the Bond film, I had just over 100 covers of magazines, and there behind him you can see the sort of coverage we did at that time, and these are.
David, do you think it's true to say that if you meet someone like Tom Carlyle in your career, who was a publicist but an incredibly influential one, and that he sort of didn't make you as a photographer, obviously, but he pushes you into lots of different areas.
Well,
he
invites you.
Invites you.
Yeah, is a better word.
But isn't that great to meet?
Yeah. But you know, if you look back, you have to. Of all the people, or of all the photographers, if he chooses you, he chooses you for a reason.
And what's the reason?
I've no idea. Other than
he just liked
he did it a lot, you know, and I was lucky to work on, you know, some of the.
You did say
the
something
iconic
to me
movies
about luck.
Sorry?
You said something to me about luck when we were chatting before. That you don't make your own luck. Everybody has luck. No. I just have this theory. Everybody has, roughly during their life, the same amount of luck. The important thing is when you understand which bit of luck is important to grab hold of. Most people don't. They have luck, but I don't do that. When I have luck, I grab it. and utilize it and try to find a way of making it into something different from what other people do. There's no point in doing the same thing as everybody else because everybody else has been doing it. You know, so why would anybody be interested in that? So somehow you always have to discover a way of doing it which is just subtly different. You know, it's and some people are quite good at doing that, and I think I'm quite good at doing it. David, in addition to all this fashion stuff, we should talk about, you know, the reportage you did, things like Churchill's funeral and Aberfan. What is this?
These are pictures from Churchill's funeral. Now, this is much more what I enjoy doing and did most of my life, and that is there would be some event which I used to make a rule to myself. Do I think this particular event is going to be of interest in 50 years' time? If I thought it was going to be of interest in 50 years' time, it seemed to me it's a good idea. It's worth doing, you know. Because not only can you get it published at the time, but you can get it published all the time, out of archive, etc., etc., etc. But I used to work in a slightly different way. Most of the time what happened, if you got something like Churchill's funeral, the Sunday Times or the Observer, the Telegraph, etc., would assign photographers to do, I forget what it's called, anyway, it's a fixed point. So you might be said. Somebody might say, "Will you go on the top of Admiralty Arch, for example, and we need the picture of the horses and the coffin coming down." And then there'd be another person that would be at St Paul's, and another person would be, and they'd be there fixed all day. Now, I never wanted to do that. It seemed to me silly. You end up with one picture and that everybody else has. So I always tried to work as though I was doing the whole story myself. And that.
And how did you get away with that? Because I mean, how did you? So you're sneaking around doing your classic photographs, but then selling them, yes?
Yeah.
But so did they know you were this?
Well, by this time, you know, if you're sensible, you know every picture editor. You know, it's all to do with doing it, to being a doer. So
but specifically, you said that you know there were photographers who did the front of the magazine.
Yes.
And then at the back there was this trivia section that no one was interested in.
Yeah. Well, when I started, the young photographers around me, unfortunately you probably wouldn't know their names, but there was Don McCullen was there, Philip Jones Griffiths was there, John Bulmer was there, Patrick Ward was there. It's a very formidable group of photographers that were all interested in current affairs-y sort of thing, and like to do news sort of stories, which I didn't really like doing, and therefore I was always aware that I was second best to them. So for the first 5 years, particularly in England, I was okay. I could work for the magazine, but I knew I wasn't as good as they were at what I do. Then when the colour supplements started, the colour supplements, all of them were doing current affairs stories. They would do 5 or 6 stories, but always at the back of the magazine there would be 5 pages of trinky-tronk stories, you know, trivial things. And the only person in the country that could get the pictures in focus all the time that was interested in doing those stories was me. So from 1961, I never did a story which wasn't published, not a single story. Now, most of the time, I was inventing the stories myself. Picture editors have a really difficult time because they have to think up 10 stories a week for their magazine. So if you come to them with a story which fits their editorial policy, you've got them off the hook. They don't have to think up ideas.
You're just slotting into what, very cleverly, to what they want, really.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
So after church, we've then got Aberfan, have we?
Yeah, this was Aberfan, which was the most difficult thing I ever photographed, because I was in Bristol in a car and I, on the radio, heard that it was happening. And so I went back and arrived in the afternoon. Obviously it happened in the morning.
Yeah.
And I arrived in the afternoon and photographed through the night until the next day. But it was, I mean, you can't think of anything more obscene than crap coming down a hillside and suffocating 122 children. I mean, that's just about as bad as it can get, particularly when it need not have happened. I mean, it was just purely finance of the coal board which had these things going. And it was difficult because when I got there, I was absolutely aware that what I was seeing was miners trying to dig their children out from slurry, which is impossible to do because slurry is liquid, and so as quick as you dug, it filled in again. But very naturally, these guys, you know, trying to save their children, they didn't want voyeurs looking at them, etc. That was their natural inclination, was that they didn't want you there. And yet I knew that this was an event that had to be covered in many ways. So you have this balance of having to concentrate and photograph in a situation where the people don't want you. And that's very, very difficult to do, etc. Very, very difficult to do. Of course, in the end, it turned out right. You know, my pictures were shown in Parliament, and they had a weeny bit to do with the fact that all slag heaps were flattened in Wales afterwards. So I was right knowing that it was important to do, but it was still very difficult.
Were people literally telling you to go away? Were they shouting at you?
No, but you can sense.
Yeah.
You know, when somebody doesn't want you.
You did say to me that you've never ever asked permission to take a photograph.
No.
So, which is amazing, really, particularly nowadays. But in a way, you have to do that to get the photographs, don't you?
You do it because you think it's important to do, and most of the people that complain have nothing else to do but complain about things. They think it gives them stature.
Here, you weren't the only photographer.
No, there was a lot of there, and people like Dimbleby, who was there, did a wonderful job.
And what were you focusing on? You were.
Oh, well, I was just doing.
What was impressed you?
What makes a story? You know, you need a picture which tells you where something is happening, and then you need a key picture like this one here, which was probably the most famous picture from Ffoton, which is likely to go across 2 pages in a magazine, and then you need, I mean, this was the insane picture. Every time I look at that, I have no idea why I did it, because that is at the top where everything slid from.
Right.
So for some reason I went up there, knowing that it could slide again.
Probably no one else took the picture.
I know, no. But that's to
but
do.
This is this is a thing, isn't it? That as I'm going to call you, the artist, it is really impossible that you have to keep this cool, really.
Yes.
In an extremely emotional, appalling situation, you've got to keep this absolute focus.
And it does take 100% concentration. I mean, one of the problems I have now is my head is not too bad, but my legs don't work, and my shoulders don't work. So, I mean, I found myself last Saturday, I think, somebody kindly let me photograph the baptism of the child in the thing. But I was aware that I wasn't doing it as well as I could do, because I was feeling my shoulders hurting and my legs weren't working. And so the concentration wasn't 100% on shooting pictures, So now I'm having this problem as to whether I should give up, because you can't pretend you can do something unless you're concentrating 100% on it. I mean, you don't want to go and be operated on by a surgeon who has shaky hands.
Luckily, the photographs aren't going to die, so that's all right. You can still go on, even if 1 in 5 works. It's okay. But let's just keep going, because the thing that distinguishes your career as we go on is that. So that's the Grosvenor riots, isn't it?
This is Grosvenor Square riots.
So that's another one where you're
the same sort of thing.
Getting the quirky stuff, not necessarily what everybody else is getting.
No.
And then as you go on with the next one, this is you saying, I don't want to be this fashion photographer. I'm just amused by it. Tell us about this picture.
Well, I just find the world funny and charming, and I love it, and I think it's a wonderful place to be. But if you freelance, as I've always done, I've never wanted to work for any magazine or anything. One of the biggest problems is access to places. So one of the things that I learned to do was to make contact with various magazines. Vogue was one of them, and various other magazines. And what I would do is I would say to them, look, I'm going to go and photograph this. Will you let me use your name to get access? I would never be asking them to pay me any money or anything. I just wanted the access. And then I would go and shoot, and then I'd say to them, okay, you can have first look at these pictures, etc. And I did an enormous amount of things. And this is typical of the sort of thing. There was a thing called Queen Charlotte's Ball, which basically was a lot of very rich people selling off their daughters to merchant bankers, basically. And they always used to go to this thing and dance around and curtsy to the Queen. And the Queen, being quite sensible, decided it was a stupid thing to do. So she decided not to do it anymore. And so the people that are to do with the Debs, they were called Debs Delights, wanted to keep it going. So for some reason or other, somebody came up with this bizarre idea that you'd have a Christmas cake and all these poor little girls would go and not curtsy to the Queen this time, but to curtsy to the Christmas cake. So I found that funny, very funny. So I went and would go to this was done with the access for Vogue magazine, so I would go and shoot the pictures and then distribute the pictures around the world. And it's such a quirky idea that it would probably publish in 15 different countries, you know. So it was pretty easy to make a living doing this. And of course, and it's enormous fun. I mean, I can't think of anything more fun than...
going forward, going on, this is, I mean, this is... but this sort of photograph is what you...
Which I'd love to...
leading you away. Because you could have, as we talked before, you could have stayed in London with your studio and your money, and instead you came back to Wales, which is
the next one.
And started doing all this sort of people in situations photography.
Well, what I actually did was that I was in London working and realising that I was having to do certain things that I really didn't want to have to do. That they were enjoyable to do, but I didn't end up with something that I thought was meaningful, that would last the test of the 50 years, etc. So I thought, well, I'd come back to Wales, and which is my home, and I would see if I could survive in Wales, and so my idea was, I thought I'd give up a third of my time and just photograph it, do nothing but photograph in Wales, but not pay myself anything. So I would do it just as though I was an amateur photographer, and I would just spend 2/3 of my life making a living in summer, and it just worked very, very well. And so I decided that I would do a project on, I'm always interested, I'm interested in words that people use a lot, but my guess is that they don't actually know what they mean. So one of them, which always puzzles me, is people want to call themselves an artist. And I say to them, well, what do you mean by that? You know, and then it's as though they think I'm attacking them. I'm not. I'm just saying, what do you mean by the word, you're an artist? You know, it's a kid on the back table making their scribble. Is they being an artist, or is I just don't know. I personally am cynical and think that people call themselves an artist because they think it gives them stature. They think it, you know, they think they're better than the person up the valleys that's making a tablecloth or something in the community centre. I personally don't. You know, I think that as long as people try to do what they do as well as they do. I like John Kerry, who wrote a book called What Use of the Arts or something, and in the end he said that art is what any single person thinks is art, but it might only be art for that one person. And I'm a great believer in that. I think that's wonderful.
But David, you are a great, whether you're an artist or not is for the audience to judge.
It doesn't matter.
This is the example of your planning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so when I came back to Wales, one of the words that I was interested in, I was always hearing people in Wales saying, oh, this is my culture. And I'd say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by the word culture? And again, they get very defensive, as though you're attacking them. I mean, you're not. You're simply saying, you're using this word a lot. What does it mean? Now, it happened that when I was starting off in London, when I was photographing the coffee bars, one of the coffee bars I shot pictures in was called the Partisan. And the Partisan was where the original Aldermaston marches were organised, etc. It was a coffee bar, and it was run by people like Raymond Williams was there, and a lot of philosophers from Warwick University. Doris Lessing was there, young Doris Lessing, and Hobbinot is the historian.
Hobsbawm.
Sorry?
Hobsbawm.
Hopscotch, yeah, that's it. And they were all there, and so I kind of knew them all to have coffee with. I didn't know any of them particularly well. But when I came back to Wales and wanted to do the thing in culture, I looked up Raymond Williams, who actually wrote a book called Culture, which is considered, definitive book on culture, and sat down to him and said, look, just break it down, tell me what is meant by culture, And in the end, he said very simple, he said culture, by and large, is formed by two things. It's formed by weather and terrain. So if you live on the top of a mountain, it rains all the time, that develops a certain kind of way of living. If you live in the middle of the desert, where it's sun and hot all the time, that produces a different type of living. If those places are extremely isolated, then sometimes you have a religion forms there, and sometimes you have a language forms there. And that I love trying to make everything simple, and that I understood him when he taught that. So one of the things I did when I came to Wales was and I do this on all the stories I do, even if it's a little tiny story, is that I make what I call a spider's web. I start to write down what are the things that interest me about Wales, and then I do them. And then what that does is it gives me something to fall back on. So it stops you photographing the easy things all the time and not photographing the difficult things. Whereas in fact you should be doing the opposite. If it's difficult, you should be spending the most time on the difficult thing to get it right, and the easy thing you can spend 10 minutes on because you can get it right straight away.
Don't you think though that perhaps the easy thing in a way is what you're most natural with? And so if we move on to some of the photos you've taken in Wales, these, okay, so they're not all easy actually. This one was very difficult to get, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, sometimes access is difficult to get to, but problems. I love problems because problems are not really problems. There's something to be solved. Therefore, they're positive. So every time you have a problem, you should say, "Oh, that's lovely. Now how do I solve that?" And you sit down and you solve the problem. And most of the time through our life, we solve all our problems.
But to get to this one, how many strip clubs did you have to
I had done. It was very easy to get into rugby clubs, where these all macho people. I used to play rugby, but sorry, it's the same. Always have at Christmas some poor girl comes and sort of takes all her clothes off, and they all. Every male, for some reason or other, if they see a woman with lacking in clothing, thinks that they are the wonderful male that this woman should be in love with, or something. I mean, it's a really bizarre sort of fantasy that male have, which I think is awful and disgusting. But I'd always wanted to get to a hen do in thing that had a male stripper, and finally I got there, and boy oh boy was it funny, because all the women there were just wonderfully giggly, embarrassed, and they all were enjoying themselves, and I was being groped like mad, shooting pictures, etc. But the difference in atmosphere was unbelievable. Just unbelievable. One was joyous and one was vulgar and nasty. And I tried to bring that sort of thing out in the pictures.
Would you say that was a difficult picture to take or an easy?
No, this was easy, but I mean it looks like a war zone, doesn't it?
Yeah,
but that's in North Wales on the Lynn Peninsula, seaside, typical Welsh seaside picture, I think.
So David, so I've seen you at work because we invited you to a party we had, and you were invisible.
Yes.
And is that something you actually work on? Because you wear your dark clothes.
Yeah.
I've seen you at the Fete as well.
Yeah.
You know, you just sneak around, if that's not quite the right word, but you're just like the invisible man, and no one sees you, and you're just doing that. Is that something you have to work on?
It's like all these things. You have to have almost the equivalent of muscle memory.
Right.
In other words, you do it so often that you no longer think about doing it. You know, so you have to be so in control of your camera that you don't even realize. That's why this silly thing of people with camera clubs and things, they always talk about changing their cameras. Well, why are they changing their cameras? You know, all I've got is a box with a hole in the front. All cameras are the same, you know. But it's good if you use one. I mean, when I started after Hungary, I had the money. I bought 2 Leicas, and I used them for 45 years. You know, and then by then it was like playing a piano. You don't expect to go and see Barenboim looking at the notes when he's playing his piano. You expect to see him listening to the piano playing itself. You know, and.
But do you have any tricks of the trade in that you are, this invisibility thing, you're completely familiar with your camera, I get that. But how do you stop people seeing you? I mean, do you not look a different way? Or?
Well, no, I mean, the first thing is, if you're going to be a photographer, you should make up your mind whether you want to have, you want to be a fashion icon or a photographer. So if you're a photographer, you should be the person that's not noticed at any party. Mm-hmm. In other words, you don't go there to be the best dancer. I used to say to students. Are
you looking at people? Do you look up? Do you look down?
I can't. A lot of the time, I look over shoulders. Uh-huh. It's amazing how accurate. When you see somebody looking at you, you can see they're looking at you. So you see their eyes. But if you move your eyes just over the right or left shoulder, somebody can tell you're not looking at them. Okay. But through the camera, you can still see them, if you see what I mean. So I tend to, by instinct, do that a lot. Yeah. But an enormous amount of it is to do with.
It must be such a habit that it just.
It's absolutely a habit. It's like a surgeon. You know, the surgeon. If you have a bad operation, you want to be operated on by somebody who does 4 operations a day, not once at the weekend a month. No, sure. You know, and the reason you want that is because the surgeon has muscle memory. Yeah. And is doing it all almost by instinct.
Yeah. So David, we're going to have to move. We've been talking for an hour, which has been lovely, but we're just going to finish off with that horrible thing called COVID, when you were in your cottage down the road.
Yeah, yes.
And what did you do then?
Okay, well, COVID came about, and it was difficult. I thought, well, you know, I like shooting pictures. What am I going to shoot pictures of? So in the end, I decided I'd pretend I was an estate agent photographer trying to sell my cottage. So I just spent the time photographing, and this is a couple of the pictures that were in it, and shot the garden, etc. But what was nice was that this is a picture through my back window, and National Geographic used it across 2 pages, which was lovely. So I suddenly earned some money out of COVID. And then the picture I put over here, this is the first picture I shot after COVID was over. I suddenly went and decided to have my feet looked at and cut, etc. So that was the day after we were allowed to mix.
And was she expecting you to take a photograph?
No, I just I did actually say, you know, do you mind?
But you just the camera's there, isn't it?
Yeah,
you can't bring it
yeah.
So let's finish with a picture of Tintern, which is the.
Okay. But one of the things that I did reasonably early on was to realise that as I get older, part of the problem with getting older is your legs don't work, you know, and so it's difficult to get around, etc., and it's difficult to concentrate for a long time. So I thought, well, I'll just photograph in the village as much as I can, and so I just started photographing.
This is the fate from some time ago.
Well, this is from I think 1976 at the top.
When it was more of a...
When it was much more a carnival than it's a bit like Woolworths now. You know, it's a lot of little stalls selling Twinkie trunks, but at that time it was such a wonderful sort of carnival. They had floats and so everybody in the village involved. Everybody was dressed up in costume and things like that, and it was absolutely wonderful. And it was very much community orientated.
And is that the duck race?
This is the duck race.
Yeah. Very recently.
Yes, quite recently.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that I always photograph is the shops and things as they disappear. So I usually do it for. So this was the shop that was bizarrely in Tintern was this thing that used to. A shop that used to sell grand pianos. You know, you go there and there's a bloody Steinway for sale, and you think, how does that come to Magnum? It sadly closed down, but
Tintern has one or two quite strange things lurking in the middle of it, David.
Yeah. I try very. The mistake I made was that I hoped desperately that I was going to get into very personal lives, you know. So I had this fantasy of photographing Sunday lunch at home, you know, and playing Monopoly together as a family in the afternoon. And I just suddenly discovered that doesn't really happen, you know. But I'm still desperate for anybody that's going to get married or have baptisms or funerals or their kids' birthday parties or so. I promise you that I tackle it as though I'm working for Life magazine. If I'm there. I really do it quite seriously.
It's a great privilege to have you in the village, and that's completely true, because we met David and then invited him to a party, and he took some incredible pictures of our friends who were all yapping away to each other and completely failed to notice David taking very key photographs, revealing their characters, etc., etc. So we've had just over an hour, and I think that's the talk. And thank you very much, David. It's absolutely revealing. And we'll have a few questions, shall we? Would that be a good idea? And then after that, there's some books at the back, and we haven't even had time. We haven't talked about the Newport art course, and we haven't talked about your reinvention of yourself as an Instagram guy with 70,000 followers in your, unbelievable. And that book at the back has those photos. It's 25 quid, and I'm sure David would sign it and make it worth at least 35 quid, if not more. But shall we just have 10 minutes of questions and then wind it up? What do you reckon? Yeah. A bit of anybody got a question for David? Yes.
Yep. Probably everybody here has got a camera on them, I imagine, embedded in their telephone.
So, sorry, can you repeat the question?
If you say it, I'll repeat it so everyone can hear it. Yeah.
So I said everybody here has probably got a camera with them embedded in their telephone.
Yes.
Have you got any particular advice as to how we can get the most out of our mobile telephones cameras?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the technical side of the camera, they're fantastic. You know, it's wonderful. And the idea of everybody shooting pictures, I think is lovely. You know, it's a very social act doing it. So I have nothing against lots of people shooting pictures. The sad thing about it is there was a time when you shot pictures on a box brownie and you put the pictures in albums. And if you were very good, you actually wrote the date and the caption. And those albums have enormous historical and sociological value. In fact, one says, and I think it's true, that if there's a fire in a place, the first thing that people grab is not the painting off the wall or this, it's the family album and the wedding album. So there is something incredibly important about that type of photography. Unfortunately, when people do it with the iPhones, most of the time they take the picture, but it's never going to be seen again. And so it's wiped out a whole sort of real use of photography at that sort of very social level. That photography at that social level has an enormous use in the history of the world. You know, it has enormous use 100 years after you take it, but it has absolutely no use if it doesn't have a caption and a date.
Have you used an iPhone camera?
I don't.
No.
Partly because I'm not quite sure how to use it, and I always have my cameras with me, you know. But it's a wonderful thing of people getting together and being social and everything. And so I think it's very positive. I always and you know, young students are always saying, "Oh well, there's so many people shooting pictures." And I say, "Well, if you think that's your competition, then give up now."
Have we got another question? Any more questions? Someone at the hello? Yes, right at the back. Say that a bit louder. What's your favourite picture, David?
My favourite picture?
Yeah, ever.
Well, I can tell you what to me is the most important picture, and that is that I had a very bad cancer operation. And the only picture I actually have, which is really linked to me at home, is a picture taken up my backside called colonoscopy. And so I got that picture, and I always have it, and I show it to people when they start trying to talk about great pictures and this, that, and the other. I said, nothing can be more important than a picture up your backside. You know, so if you start with saying that that's the most important picture you can possibly have taken, then the rest just, it's a silly discussion. You know.
Is that a good answer for you? What? You've hit on something very important there. So one more question or two more questions? Yes, hello. Yeah.
Do you print your own pictures?
I do, in so much that I have a printer, and the printer dictates enormous amount about the sort of camera and things I use. The printer I've got is the biggest printer I could get into my cottage front room. It can produce a picture 2 foot by 3 foot, so that's the maximum I ever want to print. And so I can work back from that. So I can have a less than the poshest camera in a strange sort of way, because I don't need... People sort of buy all sorts of incredibly expensive cameras that'll blow up, you know, to the side of the wall there, and all they ever do is print a little print like this, you know. And you can buy second-hand cameras now for, you know, £50 a digital camera, which will take perfectly good pictures, you know, perfectly good pictures. So the camera's not important.
We've got one more down here.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you specialise in black and white because it has a more emblematic quality, a real clarity about it. So I don't know. It's just
She's asking whether...
Yeah.
It's
No, I shoot in black and white because when I started, the chemist only sold black and white film. I mean, it was as simple as that. And then once you spent 6 months getting to the muscle memory of what it is you're using, then you think, well, why change? You know, it works for me. And I'm sure it's the same in all things. The problem is that people tend to always think that if they chop and change, that somehow will make them better. Or this is the new solution. you know, it's about people that feel depressed and suddenly decide they're going to wave their hands around in the woods or something, as though that's going to solve their life. And the answer is it isn't.
Shall we have one more question? Yes.
Hi David, I just wanted to know, how do you consider yourself and your body of work? Are you a journalist or an artist?
I'm a photographer. Simple as that. I repeat, to me the word artist is something that you give to somebody else. So it's a bit like being knighted or something like that. So I would say that Kudelka was, I would call him an artist, but he would call himself a photographer. And it just doesn't really matter. But I'm just a jobbing, you know, it's my work. I earn my living doing it. And if I don't get paid, I die of malnutrition. It's as simple as that. And so I try to do it as well as I can. And that means, you know, learning, just learning to do everything well. So part of, you know, when there were a lot of magazines, that meant that you knew all the picture editors and editors well enough to phone them up and have lunch with them. And if you had lunch with them, you could talk to them about the story and you stood a chance of doing it. But that's part of being a professional. The problem is that nowadays I sense that most people don't want to go more than 500 yards from their back.
And they don't do the lunches, sadly. That's another thing. We've got one more question, I think, and then that would better be it, I think. Yes, Anne.
Okay. This guy takes pictures. When he started taking pictures, they were all slides.
Yes.
And the house got fuller and fuller of filing cabinets.
Yes.
Until I thought we would be living on top of the filing cabinets until he went digital. How do you keep and store your pictures?
How do I store them? Nowadays, because I shoot all digital, it's stored on a little tiny hard drive, you know. So I guess you're not answering that. When I was shooting on film, the film was cut into strips and went into archival books, and which, you know, are made by people that produce books for archival storage of pictures. I mean, it's just. But if when you get into things like, if you're talking about glass slides, etc., all of these things are difficult because you're talking about chemicals, and therefore stuff has to be stored in a very specialist way because it goes off very quickly. And it's part of the problem that museums have when they're, in theory, they don't really want to take pictures anymore because they have to archivally protect them by law, and that costs a lot of money, So basically, just put them in boxes.
And if you've been to David's house, you will see that actually there's quite a lot of photographs and there's so I think we better wind it up there. And obviously, if anybody David, if you is serious about coming round to doing events in roundabout, and so and for now we're going to move up the back and do some book selling if anybody's interested. And I think we should thank David with a big round of applause for a fantastic